Part 4, Cartesian rationalism. Now, I think we all know what happened then. Some people in the Iberian Peninsula who were descended from Celts and Iberians decided that they were going to kill a bunch of people who were descended from Moors. And one of the things they did is found and opened the Library of Toledo. And in that they found a whole bunch of books that had escaped burning by the truly civilized Europeans, and rediscovered all those Greek ideas and some Roman ideas too, and we had the Renaissance. Well, it took a little while, but in the early 17th century, I'm going to say about 1630, a guy named René Descartes decided that he was going to figure everything out. And he came up with this thing that's now usually called rationalism. Not rationality, rationalism. And that wasn't just the idea that reason was a pretty good tool. It is a pretty good tool, and people go to school to learn about it, and I do it pretty well, and I like to use it, and it's quite a lot of fun. But as Abraham Kaplan said, with the law of the instrument, when all you have is a hammer, the entire world looks like a nail. And you try to drive a screw in with a nail, and it's not going to go all that great. I'm going to divide rationalism into two components. First is the assertion that the best way to be rational is to be reasonable. That is completely turning on its head everything that the alchemists and Shakespeare, who was pretty smart and got things pretty good, knew. The second idea is that in our brains we have this rational engine, like a computer, and it perceives reality perfectly well through the senses. And so if you only present people the same facts, then they'll come to the same conclusions. I'm going to get a little political here because the Democrats, at least, still haven't gotten the memo. And that is why they continue to nominate human calculators like Dukakis and Gore and Kerry for the president. They just don't get that this doesn't win elections, and it certainly doesn't do good governance. Sometimes Democrats win based on charisma. Clinton, for example. Clinton the first. I mean, Clinton the husband, not Clinton the wife. Remember that the Democratic Party really wanted Hillary Clinton, but Obama was just such a good orator and had a little bit more charisma. It's not very difficult to have more charisma than Hillary Clinton. And so he won. Okay, so he was a disappointing president. And then the Democratic Party wanted her against Trump. And to be fair, she had some good script writers, but she just didn't have enough charisma to pull it off and came across as phony. But back to Descartes. We've since figured out, I think, that both of the principles of rationalism are wrong. A, people don't have these little computer-like calculating devices in their brains. Now, this doesn't mean to say that I think you could not build a computer that did what a human being did. You just have to use some very creative programming techniques that you're not used to, which in fact AI researchers are doing, albeit still at a rather dumb stochastic level. And the other idea that being reasonable is is how you become rational. I think that didn't work because about the time of the Revolution, what started was what's normally called the modern period, and people were very, very confident that science and reason and all that stuff would lead to a wonderful world. And that idea pretty much vaporized with the first atomic bomb. Then we entered the postmodern period and postmodernism. And that's really all that postmodernism is. Postmodernism is no doubt has a lot of stuff that's stupid and confused, but that is because our postmodern world is stupid and confused. For example, we have these artificial realities that we see on the TV every night and on the internet. And it's something that's obviously a lot more complex than the modernist thought. And we've got to figure out ways to deal with them. And since we have no way of doing that other than by experimenting, some of the ideas are going to be wrong or stupid. But that does not mean going back into the belief that the moderns had it all figured out. Anyway, back to Descartes. There was kind of a backlash amongst some pretty good thinkers almost immediately. In around 1680, a guy named Fontenelle criticized it and had really good criticisms. Much later in the 19th century, about the middle of the 19th century, a semioticist philosopher by the name of Charles Peirce criticized this and came up with a fairly modern concept of cognitive science. For some reason, well, I think I know the reason. I think the postmodernists prefers the inferior Saussure because he was French, and they seem to think that French stuff is impressive. But Peirce gave us a lot of ideas, including the idea of an icon. If you see an icon on your screen, that means that that's an idea that originated with Peirce. He had about 60 different kinds of signs, but the three that people seem to have liked were the icon, which I've described, the symbol, a word is a symbol, and the index. And the index is something with a physical connection to the thing it is a sign of. Let me see if I can still do this. Well, if you see something like that, excuse me, it's an index of anger, and it's got a physical connection. You can see that. Smiles are like that. You know, eye contact, eye movement, the muscles around the eye. All of these things are indices of internal states. And that shows a little bit about a correct view of how language and cognition is embodied. We can only understand new information in terms of stuff we already know. And the one thing that each and every one of us knows how to do, that is, our brains know how to do, is run a body. And all of this stuff in our brains that is used to run a body is also used for all of our cognition, including logic. Anyway, Nietzsche also came up with a pretty modern view of cognitive science in the 1870s. I believe it was 1873, but that essay was only published posthumously. Modern cognitive science didn't happen until the 1980s. And the reason it happened was because Noam Chomsky who was a consummate Cartesian classicist, pretty much held back the development of linguistics for a quarter century. And some of his former students, including George Lakoff, decided eventually that enough was enough. So if you really want to know the modern ideas of how things work, how the brain works, how meaning works, how understanding works, the relationship of individuals to reality, you couldn't do better than to look at cognitive science and cognitive linguistics. And the place to start, I think, is George Lakoff, who was a pioneer.